And we can read the Sanskrit and translation together if you like. Yagnartat karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartam karma konteya mukta sangha samachara. Translation. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work binds one to this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain unattached and free from bondage. Text 10. Saha yagnya praja shritsva Purovacha prajapatihi anena prasavishyadvam esha vostvishta kamaduk. Translation. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this yajna sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you all desirable things." Text 11. Devan bhavayatanena te deva bhavayantuva parasparam bhavayanta shreya param avapsyata. Translation. The demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you, thus nourishing one another. There will reign general prosperity for all. Text 12. Ishtan bogan hivo deva dasyante yagnya bhavitaha terdatan apradayabhyo yo bhunkte stena eva saha. Translation. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, sacrifice, supply all necessities to man. But he who enjoys these gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. Text 13. Yagna shishta shina santo muchante sarva kil bishai bunjate te dvagam papa ye pachant yatma karanat. Translation. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. Text 14. Anad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anasambhavaha yagnyad bhavati parjanyo yagnya karma samudbhavaha. Translation. All living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. Text 15. Karma brahmodbhavam vidhi brahmakshara samudbhavam tasmat sarva gatam brahma nityam yagne pratishtitam. Translation. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. Text 16. Evam pravartitam chakram nanuvarta yatihaya aghayur indriyaramo mogham partha sajivati. Translation. My dear Arjuna, a man who does not follow this prescribed Vedic system of sacrifice certainly leads a life of sin, for a person delighting only in the senses lives in vain. Text 17. Yastvatma ratir eva syad atma triptascha manavaha atmanyeva cha santushtas tasya karyam navidyate. Translation. One who is, however, taking pleasure in the self, who is illumined in the self, who rejoices in and is satisfied with the self only, fully satiated, for him Narto nakritena hakaschana na chashya sarva bhuteshu kaschid artha vyapashrayaha. Translation: a self-realized man has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor has he any reason not to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any other living being. Text 19. Tasmad asakta satatam karyam karma samachara asakto hyacharan karma param apnoti purushaha. Translation: therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty, for by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. I'll go back and read translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder, Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Text 9 translation: work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work binds one to this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction. And in that way, you will always remain unattached and free from bondage. Purport: since one has to work even for the simple maintenance of the body, the prescribed duties for a particular social position and quality are so made that the purpose can be fulfilled. Yajna means Lord Vishnu, or sacrificial performances. All sacrificial performances also are meant for the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu. The Vedas enjoin Yajno vai Vishnu. In other words, the same purpose is served whether one performs prescribed yajnas or directly serves Lord Vishnu. Krishna consciousness is therefore performance of yajna as it is prescribed in this verse. The Varnashram institution also aims at this for satisfying Lord Vishnu. Varnashramacharya vata purushena para puman Vishnur aradyate. Vishnu Purana 388. Therefore, one has to work for the satisfaction of Vishnu. Any other work done in this material world will be a cause of bondage. For both good and evil work have their reactions, and any reaction binds the performer. Therefore, one has to work in Krishna consciousness to satisfy Krishna or Vishnu, and while performing such activities, one is in a liberated stage. This is the great art of doing work, and in the beginning, this process requires very expert guidance. One should therefore act very diligently under the expert guidance of a devotee of Lord Krishna, or under the direct instruction of Lord Krishna himself, under whom Arjuna had the opportunity to work. Nothing should be performed for sense gratification, but everything should be done for the satisfaction of Krishna. This practice will not only save one from the reaction of work, but will also gradually elevate one to transcendental loving service of the Lord, which alone can raise one to the kingdom of God. Gurudev Dhanavir Goswami, if you'd like to say something, we would love it, or at any time, please do. So work, Shishi Gornitai. So work in the working, but giving the results to Krishna, not being attached to the reaction of work, not being attached to some fruitive results. Prabhupada says this practice will not only save one from the reaction of work, but will also gradually elevate one to transcendental loving service of the Lord, which alone raise oneself to the kingdom of God is learn this service attitude, learning to serve Krishna and like we think of King Janaka sometimes, who is the father of Sita and the father-in-law of Lord Ramachandra. And he was a king, and he had so much work to do. And but even the sages would go ask him advice, and because he was working, but he was very unattached to his work, and he understood to do everything for Krishna or Lord Vishnu. Some people might read the Vedas, the Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Atharva Veda, Samaveda, they might read those and they might they might do some sort of rituals to please the demigods or something. But there's higher stages than that where one realizes that all these are done to serve the Supreme Lord. You know, like when you serve the hand, you're serving the whole body. And or when you feed the stomach, you're feeding the hand as well. So everything gets fed that way. And so so one has to, these Vedas, some people might read the Vedas and think, I want to get to the higher planets. I want to get to the heavenly planets. It sounds nice, right? Living for many, many years, much longer than we live here, enjoying Soma Ras beverage, the heavenly planets, like, for instance, Svargaloka, the heavenly planets, and this includes, you know, the sun and the moon and Indra's planets, but then they realized after association with priests and maybe some good association that this is not so nice either, because there's still fear there. There's still fear. Indra, you know, is protective of his kingdom sometimes, and one has to leave the body. One has to die and leave the body again. And one will still see their family members perish. And so many things that we see here that we don't like, they're still seeing these. But if we can go back, if we can make our aim to go back to the spiritual world, we don't have to, it's eternal. And your soul is actually, Srila Prabhupada says in Easy Journey to Other Planets, your soul is actually more powerful than the sun even, or the moon, or even electricity. That's pretty amazing to think that your soul, it's this atomic, it's so powerful that it doesn't have to be very big. It can be very small. But sometimes scientists speak of antimatter. And it sounds kind of like I always thought I had this kind of negative perception in my mind, you know, antimatter. It sounds kind of dark, kind of negative. But antimatter, Srila Prabhupada makes it clear, is the spiritual matter. It's the spiritual, there's material, there's matter, and then there's antimatter, which is the spiritual. And the spiritual world makes up 3/4 of the cosmic manifestation. And this material world is only 1/4 of that manifestation. And so the spiritual is so potent, it can be very small. And as soon as a soul leaves the body, it's actually powering the body. It's actually animating it. As soon as the soul leaves, the body becomes a lump, a rock, or anything that where the soul leaves, it withers away, you know. All living entities, whether it's a human or an orange, they are born, they grow, they remain for some time, they produce some byproducts, they dwindle and they vanish. And this is occurring to everything except for the spiritual nature, which is eternal and beyond birth and death. And antimatter, you know, and it is funny to these, the astronauts are wanting to go so far, and people get so excited about going these far distances away. But many yogis have traveled to the moon, and it's not so big of a deal for them. But some space agencies have spent so much money, so many millions of dollars, billions of dollars, so many lives spent working for them and being consumed by that. And they bring back some dust. You know, Prabhupada says, you know, they just bring back a little dust for all these millions of dollars. You know, here's some moon rocks. And so it's not so nice. And to make it onto these different planets, you have to have a suitable body. Just like here, we have a suitable body to live on this planet, on this earth, this Bhumandala, this Jambudweep, and you have to have a suitable body to go there and to breathe that air and things like that. But the yogis know how to leave the body at the right time, and they leave when the sun is on its northern course. You know, the sun just started to make its southern course this last week when the solstice, when the start of summer, the sun starts to make its southern course again, and the days get shorter and shorter until the first day of winter, when the days get longer and longer again. And it's kind of, you can actually see this if you look at every sunset or every sunrise throughout the year. You'll notice that in the summer, sun is setting and rising. You know, if you're looking east, you know, the north is to your left. And you can see that the sun is rising very far more to the left. It's rising more on the northern side. And then as it comes back by winter, it's rising very much on the south side. So it's very interesting, very wonderful to notice these things. And, but, you know, Prabhupada says, if God is underneath creation, then how could he have created it? You know, God is above creation. Chemicals come from God. Everything comes from God. And this text 9, speaking of Nishkama Karma Yoga, and it's like Karma Kanda versus Niskama Karma. Karma Kanda being attached to work, and Nishkama Karma Yoga still working, but giving up the results, not being attached to the results. Similar to, imagine a son who takes out it. He has some chores around the farm or something. And one son, he's very happy to do the chores, and he doesn't really ask for anything back. But another son maybe says, "Hey, father, I did these chores, but, you know, I want this allowance. You know, Bobby down the street, you know, he gets $50 a week for doing his chores. So, you know, I demand that too, or else I just don't want to do it." And so it's this attitude of, I want to do the chores. I don't necessarily I don't want to get attached to the results, and I don't need any compensation, and I'm going to enjoy the process. You know, we can get overwhelmed by how big the process is sometimes, but they say, just, you know, if you're sweeping the floor, just focus on each brush stroke. Just take enjoyment on each little sweep of the broom, and don't take on the whole world. Don't think I have to clean the whole temple in an hour. Just focus on one duty and just enjoy each little brush stroke. And then before you know it, the whole floor is cleaned up, and it was not so bad of a process. So it's about not getting overwhelmed by the whole road, you know, all at once, and just taking some steps. Nishkama karma allows a soul to be active, but in a detached way. But even higher still is one's knowledge progresses to knowledge of Vishnu, and then the detached activities are offered to him. So even someone that's reading the Vedas and thinking they need to do, you know, sacrifices to the demigods or something, with the proper association, they're eventually going to learn, well, it's not so nice. I still have to give up my body. What's even better than that? And so the Vedas and they're meant to be, this is like the yoga ladder Krishna is describing in these verses. So little steps that people are in different places and on this yoga ladder. So, and these verses are describing the journey from karma kanda to karma yoga. And every soul in the world is positioning themselves as controller, as the center, either in a subtle way or a gross way. as to position themselves as enjoyer or controller instead of Krishna. Just like animals striving for pleasure according to their limited capacity, that's the same of spiritually undeveloped humans who, in an attempt to taste sensual pleasure, act in ignorance. So moving from attached work to detached work. And it depends on the consciousness too. Your consciousness is really going to determine if you're acting in karma kanda or jnana kanda, knowledge in the pursuit of truth. And as soon as a person accepts his position as a servant of Krishna, he's no longer on the same step-by-step path as other practitioners. It may appear that way, but he's not on that same path. And because he's got the assistance of Krishna's descending mercy. And the non-devotee faces a couple of difficulties, may never understand that the highest rung of the ladder is to attain Krishna's service, and is also limited by attachment, impurity, and incapability to advance. But if one understands Krishna, he immediately becomes desireless, nishkama. So we want to many living entities are being controlled by their desires, and we want out of that cycle. So, going on to text 12. Translation, in charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, sacrifice, supply all necessities to man. But he who enjoys these gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. And Srila Prabhupada says that everyone in the material world is kind of like a thief, thieving. In fact, if you look at the 4 regulative principles, no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, no illicit sex, they're very much kind of thieving type mentalities of, let me use this person for their body, or let me gamble and take some money that this person doesn't have. And so it's very much it's usury. And reading Chasing Rhinos with the Swami recently by Shamasundar Das, and he talks about how this was San Francisco 1967, and they were giving up, they were trying their best, but they were coming very much from a hippie culture. And he talks about Prabhupada giving a lecture, and then some of them would go outside for a cigarette right after Prabhupada's lecture, or Prabhupada coming over when he was carving the first Jagannath deities, and Prabhupada saw like a pack of cigarettes on Jagannath's head or something, and he took his cane and kind of clicked him off and flew him across the room. But he was very gentle, and he knew also how to gently encourage his devotees. And San Francisco really was a huge explosion of Krishna consciousness. It really, Prabhupada, it was his first time coming to San Francisco. He had been to New York and Boston before that, but there was a lot of excited new devotees coming up in San Francisco. In fact, some people drove all the way from New York before Prabhupada came. Some people drove from New York to kind of get people fired up and to tell them about Prabhupada. And so they were very interested. And so Prabhupada came, and he came right at the right time. There's this summer of love you will hear about, and Prabhupada happened to be there right at these times. And so ISKCON was very much a part of hippie culture to some extent. In all the hippie magazines, there was ads and there was articles, even in bigger magazines like like New York newspapers and New York magazines, but they were, the hippies knew that they could come to the temple, and that if they wanted to make spiritual advancement, they knew that this was the place to do it. And so the hippies are very much sometimes open-minded, and there's different groups that are open-minded, and they want change, they want revolution, and they can all come underneath this umbrella of Krishna consciousness. In fact, upadhis means, material designations. Some person is thinking, I'm a Christian, I'm a man, I'm an American, I'm a hippie, I'm a Hell's Angel, or whatever it is. And, but really Krishna consciousness is showing, no, we go beyond that. We get rid of these upadhis, these material designations, and we transcend that. We transcend Christianity or Muslim or Jewish. Who's the group that's trying to unite them all? And they can all be united. They can all come under the umbrella of Krishna consciousness, of bhakti yoga, of ISKCON, this wonderful process that Prabhupada gave us. It's so beautiful, and in such a short amount of time. And he would give these concerts. There's a big concert, and where Grateful Dead played. In fact, the Grateful Dead, at one point, they borrowed their oven. They didn't live too far over in Haight-Ashbury, and they needed a bigger oven because they were serving a lot of devotees every week. And so they knew the Grateful Dead pretty well. So they went over and, can we borrow the oven? And so they borrowed their oven, and they had to kind of destroy, to get it back into the temple, the back of the temple, they had to kind of destroy the wall and rebuild it. And then the Grateful Dead comes back a few months later to get the oven back, and there was no way it could be removed. So it just stayed there. And, but there's a big concert, and Srila Prabhupada, Allen Ginsberg was there introducing Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada gave a very nice talk. And around the same time, there was a Krishna conscious album the devotees in New York did, and the Beatles ordered like 20 copies express to London, to the UK, and they were also hearing things about Krishna consciousness, and they were also very interested because they had all the material wealth in the world, they had all the influence in the world. It's still something missing for them, so they were still searching, and they knew they had a powerful influence. And so Strawberry Fields Forever is coming out on the radio. And at the same time, the same day, the Beatles are getting their albums. I think their Krishna consciousness albums, and they were trying to imbue some of their songs with some Vedic teachings. And then later, Shama Sundar and his group would go over and talk to the Beatles and get them very much involved in Krishna consciousness. So quite amazing. So Arjuna could think, I don't need yajnas. I don't need to do sacrifices. I just want to go to the forest and live, so I won't take from the demigods. So I won't be sinful by not offering yajnas. Not only will I not be a thief, but I won't take part in this ghastly warfare. So he could be thinking like this after Krishna speaks some of these things. And then going on to text 14, translation: all living bodies subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. So Krishna is kind of warning Arjuna, even in the forest, all food is nurtured by rains from the demigods. And therefore you cannot avoid your obligation to perform these sacrifices of your prescribed duties. You have to act according to your prescribed duties. And even the meat eaters, the people who have not given up meat yet, they are still reliant on food grains, because the animals eat the food grains, and they're still reliant on the rains. And going on to 15 translation, regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead can manifest things through, he breathes the Vedas, it is said, and he can do anything from any of his senses. He can do anything. It says through the material world, he impregnates it with his eyes. So he can do any of his senses can do anything the other senses can do. And so he breathed the Vedas, and the Vedas can also, in the fifth Veda, sometimes it's called the Mahabharata. And also included is, the Upanishads, the Puranas, and the Bhagavad Gita is considered kind of the essence of the Vedas. So you get all the Vedas by just studying the Bhagavad Gita very thoroughly. Bhagavad Gita as it is. And yeah, dependence on food ultimately means dependence on Vishnu. The personality of Godhead, being absolute, is non-different from the act of sacrifice. Gradually, the follower of the Vedas understands that Vishnu is above the demigods because he is the one who empowers the demigods worshipped in the sacrificial process. In other words, Indra's power to provide rain is supplied by the personality of Godhead. This understanding gradually blossoms into the realization that Vishnu, or Krishna, is the true object of worship. Text 16. My dear Arjuna, a man who does not follow this prescribed Vedic system of sacrifice certainly leads a life of sin, for a person delighting only in the senses lives in vain. So karma kanda sacrifices meant to attain either short-term or long-term results are born of the mode of passion. They are performed for selfish, sensual enjoyment. Long-term sacrifices are a step further on the path because they are understanding that they're not the body. And so some people might be thinking, I'll perform opulent sacrifices and attain heaven. So that's a seed. There's a seed there of eternal spiritual life. And I went on and explained this a little bit earlier. There are two types of karma yogis. There's the impersonalists and the devotees. And of these, they may be of two levels: sakama, with material desires, or nishkama, free from material desires. So if a Brahmavadi associates with merciful and powerful devotees, he can abandon his attempts to reach the Brahman and aspire for loving service at Krishna's lotus feet. So many people are wanting God to be their order supplier and grant them wishes. And then when he doesn't, they get frustrated. But we can see this sometimes. I see this sometimes, practically speaking, when for work, one thing I do is teach. I've been teaching guitar for about 11 and a half years, week after week, about 20 to 30 students a week, one-on-one. So I've been doing that for a long time. And sometimes a student will come in and they'll say a little challenge, and they'll say, play the hardest thing you know, play the most difficult passage you know, or play the most difficult chord you know. Or sometimes they will say, oh, this week I'd like to work on this, which is fair. I want to work on what they want to work on because I want them to retain their love of it. But at the same time, student should ideally come to the teacher with kind of a blank slate. And because a lot of times there was a little assignment from the week before, and then all of a sudden they don't bring up the little assignment. And I'm thinking, well, what about me trying to stay on track with you? And what about that assignment from last week where I gave you these 2 or 3 pages to work on? But then all of a sudden the student says, oh, this week I'd like to do this, and I'm thinking, where's the assignment? And sometimes I have a limited amount of time with the student. This student may only be, some students are only able to take for the summer. So, there's a student that's only going to take for a few more weeks, and then they're coming in and they're kind of setting the flow. But we have to kind of surrender to a teacher and to the teachings, and realize that we get the teachers that we need, and not always the teachers that we, want. They may not be always how we expected it, or how the teachings come. It may be different than what we expected, but if we're humble and if we can enjoy the process, Srila Prabhupada, when he came to San Francisco, they were just having pure fun. Srila Prabhupada had this big smile that could really light up the whole room. And he would be surprised sometimes when they would say something and his eyes would get really big, or sometimes he would laugh and you'd see the tears come down from laughter. And they were just amazed at, who is this person that's giving us these secrets of life? Who is this person? We've been looking for someone that's got the answers, and he actually has them. So it was a real spirit of fun back then. And taking Srila Prabhupada for rides, and not the best cars sometimes. Sometimes the passenger seat reclines all the way down, where Srila Prabhupada's way back on his seat. But he liked to go fast. He'd say, go a little faster, something like that. So Shama Sundar remembers all these things, very detailed memory. And I'm listening to a little bit of him speaking the audio book, so you get to hear it in his own words. And well, I would like to say, working without attachment is renunciation, and we have to take responsibility for our spiritual lives. We can't blame someone else if we don't reach the spiritual sky, or if things don't go the way that we like them. We have to get out of the blame game mentality. At least I do. And this competitive mentality. We must accept the principle also that we're not independent. We're part of a team, and also our enjoyment depends upon the satisfaction of higher authorities, ultimately Krishna. And today I saw a bumper sticker that said, don't honk at me, I'm having a crisis. And I feel like we all kind of feel that way sometimes. Everyone in the material world is kind of in crisis mode. We're all having a crisis. So we've got some of the answers from the disciplic succession. And so we can help people, and we can help ourselves get out of this having a crisis mentality, where we're going to enjoy our time together, slow things down a little bit, and enjoy the process. So thank you very much. Is there any comments or questions today, either in person or maybe online or something? Radhastali Mataji.
Hare Krishna. I have a question on one of the verses. Let me see here. I believe it's in one of these verses, the Lord he says the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so I'm just wondering, okay, text 15. So he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I'm curious, do you have any realization on why he speaks this way?
Yeah, I'll read the translation here. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So he's also called the all-pervading transcendence. And he's got many names, as we know. Up in the word meanings, the word is Akshara, the supreme Brahman, personality of Godhead, and the supreme truth, absolute truth, as he's called. But it makes it clear in these words. I may not be the most expert on this analysis, but it always struck me, even when I read a Bhagavad Gita 8 months before I came, or 6 months before I came to the temple, ISKCON temple. It was not Bhagavad Gita as it is, but there were some good things about it, and it got me maybe closer to finding this wonderful, absolutely beautiful, perfect Bhagavad Gita as it is. But Supreme Personality of Godhead, it always struck me. And it's amazing to think we have a book from the Supreme Personality of Godhead where it's, the Bhagavad Gita means Song of God. And so this is actually an instruction manual for life, and it's spoken by Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so it's making it a little bit clear in these 3 or 4 words that there may be other gods, there may be demigods, but he is the one that's above all. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's not a demigod, and he doesn't have to take birth again ever. And he doesn't have the material. He's not in the material nature the way all these other, Brahma, Shiva, they're all in the material world. They're all in the material world, and they all have to give up the body at some point. And the Supreme Personality of Godhead does not. And he is a person. He's supreme, and we are persons, and he is a person. So that's wonderful, because so many religions around the world say we are created in God's image. So they should be willing to accept that, yes, he is a person, and he's got a personality. And we come from him. He in this human form of life, we have a chance to make spiritual elevation in the way that a dog or a cat or an animal can't really understand higher spiritual principles. Why am I here? And they're just kind of running around, satisfying their urges the way so many people are as well. But if we could tell them that they are more than that, they should not waste this human life. They should take full advantage of it and chant Hare Krishna and Godhead, the head of all gods. So it's all right there in the phrase. Thank you very much. Any last questions or comments or further clarifications on that point from anyone? All right. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.